So let's talk about split brain phenomena for a second. Um, Before we can really talk about what the split brain phenomena is, we need to decide on the definition for a split brain patient. So, what does that mean? Essentially, it means that the corpus callosum is cut. Usually, the reason why a corpus callosum may be severed is because the person is experiencing a lot of epileptic seizures. There's some other conditions that can result in a severed corpus callosum. Sometimes there's a condition called corpus callosum agenesis, where a person doesn't grow a corpus callosum for whatever reason. It's not common. Much more common is a procedure to reverse epileptic seizures. But there's other reasons. If you haven't had a biology course, a neurology course, or like a neuroanatomy course, or taken R310, SHS 310 on anatomy and physiology of the speech system, let's really quickly take a look at the corpus callosum. So here's the corpus callosum. This means tough body, corpus body, callosum, tough. It comes from the same root word as callus. And the reason it's called that is it's really tough to cut through. So if you're doing a cadaveric study, cutting through this with a scalpel is difficult, even though the rest of the brain is very jelly-like. This isn't. It's a bundle of myelinated axons. I was going to say each one of these is a myelinated axon. That's not true. Each one of these is like multiple myelinated axons running together. But you can see these striations in here. Those are bundles of myelinated axons. Myelinated means they have a myelin sheath on them, which is a little lipid layer that gives a little more structure. It allows for faster transfer of a neural signal, the electrical portion of the electrochemical signal of the neuron. And this is the major place where the two halves of the brain talk to each other. When I say the major place, it's like the place where the two halves of the brain talk to each other. So the left hemisphere shares information with the right hemisphere and vice versa at the corpus callosum. To reverse seizures, one side of the brain begins to have a seizure. It spreads to the other side of the brain. Then the person has like a full-on epileptic event. So to prevent one side of the brain from causing an epileptic seizure in the other side, doctors will cut the corpus callosum to preserve one side of the brain from having an epileptic seizure. So that's great to reduce those symptoms, but some interesting things can happen. So this whole thing right here, this is the corpus callosum running down. That whole thing is severed. This is just an image of, how that's done. The corpus callosum, we're looking at it. Same view that we had before right here. So this will kind of come down and scrape away the corpus callosum. This is a side view. This white portion right here, that's corpus callosum. So this is showing removing the corpus callosum like that. And essentially it removes the ability of the two halves of the brain from talking to one another. So information from one hemisphere can't be shared with the other hemisphere. So what can a corpus callosotomy, that's what it's called when you remove the corpus callosum, corpus callosotomy. What can a corpus callosotomy impact? Well, one, of course, is lateralized functions. There's a lot of lateralized functions. Again, if you haven't had 310, the class that I teach, where we do talk about a lot of lateralized functions, or any other anatomy course where you talk about lateralized functions, some of those include speech. Speech is often lateralized to the left. It's not solely on the left. There's some people who have like flipped brains. More often it's left-handers that have a flipped brain than right-handers, although a really small percentage of right-handers can have that too. But it's like a quarter of left-handers that'll have just a totally flipped brain. Speech center is in the right. But for most of us, the speech center is on the left. But I think you can assume some interesting things happen here, right? If speech is processed on the left side of the brain, but all of a sudden the left and right hemispheres can't talk to each other, then information about speech is going to have a really difficult time reaching the right side of the brain. That's true. And we'll talk about that more in a second. There's also some problems with object recognition. This is not just processed in the right hemisphere. So it's not like people who have a corpus callosotomy stop being able to recognize objects. That's not true. You tend to see some deficits, like reaction time deficits, maybe occasionally using the wrong thing to the wrong object to try to do a task. But it's not like a profound impact. It just shows that the right side is either more engaged in object recognition or some tasks involved in object recognition are processed on the right. Memory, working memory, tends to, well, again, I was going to say tends to be processed on the right. That's not true. Doesn't mean that people with a corpus callosotomy have zero working memory. It means that you'll see deficits in working memory. And so that shows that something that's being processed on the right side is important to their ability to complete working memory tasks. And then the last thing is that motor movements are processed on the opposite side of the body. So the left hemisphere controls the right side of the body. The right hemisphere controls the right side of the body. Visual inputs are also lateralized like this. So what's going on the right side of your visual field, and this is kind of interesting, the right side of your visual field exists in both the right and left eyes. So it's just the right half of both eyes. The right visual field is processed by the left hemisphere. This is important when we start talking about language and recognizing visual cues. So really quickly, let's take a deeper look at this, what I was telling you. So the left optic field is in blue on the left. The right optic field is in red on the right. Red optic field, red right optic field goes to the right side of both eyes. So your eyes essentially send inputs to both left and right hemispheres. This is true for people with and without a corpus callosotomy. It's true for everyone that the eyes send to both halves of the brain. Again, the right side of the right eye, the right side of the left eye, they're both getting information from the right optic field. The left side of the left eye and the left side of the right eye are getting information from the left optic field. So then we go through the eyes down below. Then we see the outputs. Red stringy outputs coming from the eye. That's, again, right optic field. The right optic field moves from both eyes to the left side of the brain where that information is processed. And then the blue stringy outputs, those come from both of the eyes and move to the right side of the brain where the left visual field is processed in the right visual cortex. The corpus callosum is right in between those two streams. Information can be shared at this point, and also after it's processed back in the visual cortex, it'll kind of like feed forward to the frontal areas of the brain where you kind of operate, make decisions on information. And of course, information is shared across the corpus callosum at that point too. So information is being shared at several points during when you see something and make decisions about it. Then if we cut the corpus callosum, there is no longer an ability to share information between the left and right visual inputs. So essentially you can still see things over here, you can still see things over here, but information about what you're seeing in the left and right visual inputs aren't shared across the brain. And so what we end up seeing is a difference in how we interact with things, whether they're in the right or left visual field. items in the, and I made a mistake. Look at me. So language is processed on the left. So the right optic field is coming in. The right optic field goes to the left. Those should say items in the right visual field can be interpreted linguistically. Right, because the right crosses over and goes to the left. So items in the right visual field can be interpreted linguistically. Items in the left visual field cannot be interpreted linguistically. What does that mean? It means this. So this is a person with a split brain. They have a corpus callosotomy. The corpus callosum is cut. The brain can't share information between hemispheres. When this little hole is opened up and both eyes can see, so let's see, let me move my cursor here. So this hole is opened right here on the right side. The right visual input is open. That's going to go to over here. The right visual inputs for both sides is going to cross over to the left side of the brain, and the left side of the brain sees a circle, and it can access the linguistic information to report, I see a circle. Over here, when you do the other experiment with the opposite visual field, the left visual field, the left visual field, left side of both eyes, seeing a triangle. This crosses over, goes to the right side, which in most people, right side does not have, it's not where language is processed. So this person says that they don't see anything. However, you can see that their hand is reaching for an object down here and they're grabbing for the triangle, which means if you tell them grab for any object and hold on to the one that's meaningful to you, they say they see nothing. Left visual input comes in to the left side of both eyes. It goes over to the right side of the brain where linguistic information is not processed. And what happens when the researchers tell the person, grab any shape that seems meaningful to you, invariably, they will choose the shape that they saw with their left visual field. So something's biasing them to choose the shape that they saw, even though verbally they reported they saw nothing. This is the same experiment. This comes from the actual journal that this was published in. Person, right visual field sees the word face. Of course, right visual field information goes over to the left side of the brain, and the person reports that they see face. Great. Face is presented to the left visual field. The left visual field crosses over to the right side of the brain. They say that they see nothing. They're asked to draw anything with their left hand. Remember, left hand is controlled by the right side of the brain because motor inputs cross over just like visual inputs. So they're asked to draw something with the left hand, and they will draw something related to the word that they saw. So they saw a face. They said they didn't see anything, and yet they're drawing a face. So again, the information's being processed, but it's not being processed linguistically. It's not being processed in a way that we can ask a person what they saw, and they can, using language, report back to us what they actually saw. But their left hand, their right brain, the right side of their brain, their left hand knows what that side of the brain saw and can represent it either by touching it or drawing it. Here's another version of the same experiment, and it gets a little stranger. So, the right visual field is shown a chicken foot. Of course, right visual field crosses over, goes to the left side of the brain. That's where language is processed. The left visual field is shown this like snowy hellscape. It's like so snowy. Left visual field crosses over to the right side of the brain. Language is not processed on the right. The right hand, remember, right visual field sees a chicken foot, goes over to the left side of the brain where language is processed. The left side of the brain also controls the right hand. So the right hand points at chicken. The task is point at the image most closely associated with what you saw. So they'll point at chicken. And that makes sense, right? When you consider that the other options are toaster, apple, and hammer, yeah, the only thing that really fits with a chicken foot is a chicken. Maybe a toaster if you're hungry. So I don't eat chicken feet. So you're pointing at chicken. And what happens is the left hand will point to a snow shovel. Now, so far, this kind of gels with everything that we've learned in the past two examples, right? So the left visual field receives the input of a snowy apocalypse, comes across to the right hemisphere. Language is not processed there, so the person doesn't report that they saw anything. However, the right side of the brain is controlling left motor output. They're supposed to point at a picture that most closely corresponds to the picture that they saw. The left hand points to a snow shovel. So again, what this is saying is they don't verbally report that they saw anything in the left visual field, but the left hand, which is processed by the same side of the brain as the information that they saw, points at the most likely implement to deal with snow. And then it gets kind of strange. So the people will ask, hey, the researchers, not just random people. The researchers will ask, why did you choose the shovel? Like, obviously you chose chicken because it goes with a chicken foot. Why did you choose the shovel? Because they can see that they've chosen a chicken and a shovel. And they will say, to clean up the chicken poop. That's why I chose this snow shovel. Notice that there's also a rake and one of those old-timey lawnmowers and a pick. The rake could also potentially work to clean up chicken poop. Maybe. You can move it around, I guess. They'll come. So essentially what's going on is people with split brain will come up with a story, a linguistic story, to link what they can see that they've chosen with what they linguistically know is going on in the right visual field. It's crazy. So really quickly, just in case this isn't clear, what they're seeing here, only one of these, like the right visual field, really only does go to, like there's like a window that opens up and they can only see the chicken foot with the right side of the right eye, the right side of the left eye. They can only see the snowy apocalypse with the left side of the left eye and the left side of the right eye. They can see with both visual fields all of these cards here. So they know what they're touching with their left hand. But what's interesting is they don't seem to linguistically know why they're touching the shovel with their left hand. They make up a story that goes along with what they can linguistically access about the right visual field. It's so interesting. It's like it has to come up. There's information can't be shared. The right side of the brain is doing things, and it's doing things correctly, but it can't verbally report what it's doing. So the left side of the brain, the language portion of the brain, has to come up with a reason why the right side of the brain is doing something. But because they can't share information, it doesn't really make sense. So interesting, right? There's some other effects. Sometimes the left hand acts totally independent of the right. So people have reported that their left hand, controlled by the right hemisphere, will just like do stuff without them thinking that they want to do anything. So linguistic thought, they're not interpreting whatever's going on the right side, kind of seems like maybe where consciousness resides is tied to, for most people, where language is located. So it kind of seems like you, the cognitive entity, is somewhat tied to your linguistic center. And when that's cut, you have another brain living inside your body that's doing things, and you don't necessarily have access to why that portion of your brain is doing things, what it wants to do, or why. So, to go further into this, reports from one person was that he had to go to work, had to get ready to go to work. So he was like pulling on his clothes, his work clothes. Right hand, which is controlled by the linguistic center, is pulling pants up, and his left hand is pulling the pants down at the same time, because presumably the left hand, the right side of the brain, did not want to go to work. That's the interpretation of it. There's an alternative interpretation, which is just sometimes with a split brain patient, the opposite side will just do the opposite of whatever the left side does. And so, like, if you move one hand down, the other hand will go up. If you move one hand up, the other hand will go down. If you move hand apart. And that's kind of interesting. So it could be something as simple as that. Like, it's just reverse mirroring what's going on with the left hand. Could be. But this patient was convinced that the right side of the brain did not want to go to work and was trying to sabotage the attempts to go to work. There have also been reports from other people with split brain that their left hand will act violently. So perhaps they got upset about something, and the right side of the brain decides that it's angry about something. And acting violently, I mean like grabbing another person and shaking them. And they didn't realize that this was something that they wanted to do, so they had to pull their left hand off of the person with their right hand and physically restrain their own hand from continuing to try to injure this other person. So that is split brain patients. Such an interesting topic. There haven't been too many split brain patients that have shared stories like this. I think in the literature there's about 6. There may be more in the last. I can't say that I've really dug super deep into the literature in the last 5 or 6 years. So there could be a couple more, but these are the kind of the classic cases and the classic studies that we looked at there too. And so what does this mean linguistically? So this is a psycholinguistics class, right? What does this mean linguistically? Well, it means that a lot of our behaviors are interpreted by us linguistically. We do things and we may come up with like a linguistic story for why things happen. Or we see things and it accesses, say, lemmas, like just seeing things will access a lemma. And then we'll operate with that lemma in mind and come up with a plan, execute something, and kind of have like, if not full lexemes and like a narrative of what we're doing, then at least like some sort of lemma is accessed for where we're moving and what we're trying to do. And when we don't have access to that linguistic portion, our brains will kind of just respond a lot of times correctly, but not in a way that we are able to interpret, right? So the right side of the brain is still the same person. It's still that person. But they don't necessarily know what it's doing or why, because there's no language specialization on that side. So, split brain patients. Very interesting. All right, I'll see you in the next video.